this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Oh, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Class is in session, please be seated. Behaviors that get attention get repeated. Avoid the power struggle cause it will get you heated. Listen to Amanda cause she knows how to teach it. Yo, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Oh, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Yeah, yeah,
Hello and welcome to Parenting with a Punch show. I'm your host, Amanda Houle. I have a very special guest here today by the name of Lene St. John. Dr. Lene is known as the Mama Sutra, a board-certified sexologist with the American College of Sexologists and a professor of human sexuality at City College of San Francisco. She's been named one of the top 100 sex blogging superheroes by Kinkly.com every year since 2013. Dr. Lene has also been quoted in Forbes.com, Huffington Post, Livestrong.com, Pop Sugar, and Women's Health magazine, and she's been a guest on multiple podcasts, including Sex Out Loud, Sex Nerd Sandra, and Sexology. In addition, she is a writer and blogger with an upcoming parenting book that has a human sexuality focus. Lene lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her partner and 2 daughters. So exciting to have Lene here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today, Amanda. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm excited to have you on and talk all about sex because it's a very important topic. And I think a lot of couples, especially with younger children, and even as their children tend to get a little bit older, that the sex seems to sort of go missing.
Yeah, and, it can for sure.
Yeah, I hear it a lot from a lot of the families that I work with. So,
yeah,
I know how important, it is in a relationship, not being a sex specialist. But so I'm really excited to just kind of have that, open communication and discussing it. So
right on.
Yeah.
Right
so
on.
What would you say, like some tips or, to have like a healthy, sex relationship? Like, what do you think is the sort of baseline?
Yeah. So one of the things that I recognized right away in my studies to learn about sexuality is that, and I named them the 5 building blocks to a healthy sexuality. And these are things that don't really have anything to do specifically with where penises, go with vaginas and all that jazz. It's really just the key components to building a healthy sexuality. And this is like in healthy relationships, dating, love, sex, all of this stuff is really tied together, right? And so the 5 building blocks are communication, consent, respect, pleasure, and fantasy. And I use these 5 building blocks to talk to my kids. I use them in my relationship with my partner. They're really just, I think those are the core, really. Being able to communicate what you need, your needs, wants, and desires. Acknowledging the emotions that come up, because obviously they do. And lots of times we numb those things away. Mm-hmm. But, being able to talk about emotions is really important too. Like when you get jealous, when you get angry, sad or whatever, right?
Right.
Consent. I mean, that piece is super important, especially when kids are little, but it moves into our adult relationships as well, with like being able to, hold your boundaries or know what your boundaries are. And I'm not talking just sexual boundaries, like, the types of things that you might argue about, right? Like some people might have, like if you and your partner are talking about something and you get really upset, like it might be okay to say, look, on a scale of 1 to 10 for me, this topic is like a 7 or an 8. And I really need a break right now to just like calm down because I'm really fired up.
Yeah.
But that, also goes back to the communication, and it ties into the respect piece, right?
Right.
But yeah. So moving into respect, like having a healthy respect for the relationship and for yourself and for others and all of that, right? Pleasure, to round out the 5 building blocks, pleasure is more than sexual pleasure. People get really hung up on pleasure, thinking about, oh my God, how would I ever talk to my kids about pleasure? Well, it's easy because even just a hug can be pleasure, right?
Right.
Or self-care can be pleasure. What feels good to you and all of that. So it's super important, right?
Yes.
And the last one is fantasy. Before we started recording, I was talking about a fantasy that I have with you.
Yes.
I think we'll talk about it in a few minutes, but fantasy is super important as well. And being able to communicate those with a partner and not feel judged, or not to be judged either, right? And you don't have to act out fantasies. That's certainly not, some are not practical to act out, right? But
right.
Talking about them sort of takes away, it diffuses the fire behind it, right? Like somebody might feel really guilty about wanting to, get painted green like the Hulk. And then, so who knows what the case
right.
may be,
You never
right?
know.
Right. You don't know. So being able to, talk about fantasy and at the very least, this is like the bottom line for me about fantasy. If we're not going to talk to our kids about sex or sexuality or relationships, love, all of this stuff that's part and parcel to sexuality, we at least have to acknowledge to our kids that everything else that's out there in the world that's depicting quote unquote sex is a fantasy. It's someone else's fantasy. It's not necessarily real, right? And so that's, in my mind, that's super important. That's like the bare minimum of what we have to make sure kids know. Because, if they're seeing porn, most often it's just fantasy.
Yes, this is true. And I think we have such a negative connotation when it comes to like porn as well.
Yeah, a lot of the time, yeah. And I'm certainly not anti-porn.
Right.
I certainly think that there is some good stuff out there, but there's also problematic stuff, especially the stuff that relates to, not necessarily being consensual.
Right.
How do you know if it's not coming from a major movie studio who has, all these different studios actually have laws that they have to abide by,
Right. Yeah. No.
The bootleg stuff it doesn't have to. So,
right.
Pays to pay for porn.
Yes, this is true. Now, for couples that are sort of, I don't want to use the word struggling, but that sort of just, they've had children or not, and that, that their sex lives aren't really the same anymore. I feel like, at least from what I hear, a lot of it, it comes right back to the communication. And I know we talked a little bit about that, prior to the show, but what would be your suggestion when it comes to the communication piece, or even just kind of like owning, like you also said, and, in the respect and sort of just like being open to having those discussions, right?
Well, certainly being open to having the discussion in the first place is square one, right? If one person doesn't want to hear it, that's like, it's stonewalling, right? If there's something you cannot address in your relationship, like how do you ever resolve it? Right. Yep. So, that's problematic. I would say, and anybody who wants to study more about, conflict in relationship, the Gottman Institute does a really great job of this 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? There's this idea that there are negative communication styles that are really problematic in a relationship. And the 4 are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And if any of those things happen, like it's one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Like it's a sign that your relationship is going to end. However,
I agree.
There is, like, for each one of those things, there's an antidote, and it's like super simple. And what those antidotes are their communication skills, right? Like, right. Instead of stonewalling, you just say, I need to take a break for a few minutes and come back to this in a little bit. Like I said before, like I'm at a 7 or an 8 right now. And I I can't even process. I need to take a few minutes break.
Right.
And so, but in that sense, it's also being respectful, right? Like you're not just stonewalling and walking away, but you're saying, I need to take a break.
Right.
But then come back to it, right? So that's one example of one of the antidotes.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so for me, in everything that I've learned about sexuality, about sex, relationships, dating, all of it, it all boils down to communication in so many ways. And I'm jokingly saying this at the beginning of the class semester when I teach my students. I say, if you can't talk about sex, you probably shouldn't be having it. And that statement gets a lot of reaction, right? Like that's
yes.
triggering statement for people. Like, what do you mean? How dare she think that? But it's honest. And I had one of the students at the very end of the semester, just a few weeks ago, we were processing the class, like talking, it was like day before the final, let's, what did you learn? What did you take away? That kind of thing. And she brought that sentence up again. And she said, I've really been thinking about what you said at the beginning of the semester. And she's like, and I so resisted it. I so resisted the idea that, what? No, I can have sex even though I can't talk about it, And she said, but I think back to when I was 17, the first time I had sex, I didn't know anything. And she's like, and I probably did some things like, that I really didn't want to, but I just felt obligated to do. And, that doesn't feel great. And, knowing that I can choose different things now, she's like, that feels great, So
yeah,
yeah.
Talk about eye-opening, huh? I mean,
yeah.
It's, I think, and especially for, for parents of older kids to be able to kind of have that open communication, because we know that it's not really taught at all. And sex is kind of like this whole taboo, which I will never completely understand, but.
Yeah. There's a lot of history there.
Yes, exactly.
And it's not, and so much of it is not us. It's not our stuff, but we have taken it on from the other people around us, right? Our parents. I know I carried a lot of my mom and my dad's, guilt or shame or embarrassment around the topic or fear. That's another one. And it's not, it's not mine. And I had to really do a lot of work to separate that out, that it's, a lot of the messages we get are directly coming from someone else's reaction to their own experience,
So, it really is so true, because the more inner work that I've done as well is, really comprehending that, when you have a reaction to something that somebody says, it's really not about them, it's about you. It's something, triggered that. And to be able to know and realize, though, the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that you need to work on for yourself, because, it's never, it's never about them. It's about, when somebody's or even if someone says something hurtful, it's about them, not you.
Yep. Yeah. It's really hard to separate that out when you're in that tense moment or you're triggered yourself. Yeah. I mean, my partner and I struggle with this stuff from time to time as well. Like he'll get triggered about something and it'll trigger me. And it'll just be this, like, all the adults have left the room, right? Like,
right.
Just and kind of arguing for the sake of argument or whatever. But
no, absolutely. So I'm going to bring up oral sex, because I hear too often that and it's typically, of course, the woman that they don't want to give blowjobs, whether or not they stopped doing it or if they weren't doing it in the beginning. I'm not really sure. And of course, I think maybe there's some men out there that don't, they don't need it or want it as much as some other men. That has yet to be my experience, but
I think everybody likes to be pleasured in a way where it feels like they're being worshipped.
right. Yeah. So, I think that, and I know that there's so many different ways of probably approaching the the conversation, but something
Mm-hmm.
that we talked about was the whole communication piece, right? As far as, knowing whether or not it is something that your partner wants or doesn't want, and like, are
Right.
you depriving them of that? So like, what are your thoughts on
Right.
that?
Well, yeah. So hopefully I can catch all the items that we talked about right before the call started.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss anything. It is important to talk about sex and talk about the different behaviors and actions and activities that you can do together. And I can speak from my own experience, right? Like initially when my partner and I got together, that was an activity that we both liked quite a bit.
Yep.
We've been together for a few years now, and the frequency has died off. I'm just admitting my own experience here.
Yep.
Yeah, putting the vulnerable bit out.
Yep.
But the nice thing is though, like we talk about this, and neither one of us are feeling a deficit, right? Like that's really key. Like if my partner were to say, I kind of miss when you used to give me a blowjob or, go down on me or whatever, being able to say that. And then me, without feeling judged for not performing this act, recently or whatever, to be able to say, oh, okay, here's why I haven't been, or this is what's been going on for me. And here's the other little vulnerable bit that we were talking about before the call.
Yes.
I have this thing that as I've processed my own sexuality and as I've processed my relationships, the idea or the notion of my partner being with someone else used to like make me angry, used to make me jealous, or, insert whatever emotion there, right? But as I've gotten older and as I've realized, the deep connection that we have, I'm less scared of him leaving and more interested in like his pleasure. So if he were to tell me that he's really, and we've talked about this too, if he tells me that he's really missing out on blowjobs and I don't feel like it's something I want to do, then we have a couple decision points, right? We have, is it something that he wants to act on? And I'm definitely, no, I don't want to do it, which, that's one thing. Or I could do it, right? Or we could outsource it. And what I was talking about before the call, I have this sort of fantasy that, we used to go to sex parties together. If he indicated that this was something that he wanted, and I was okay with whether it was picking the person or, whatever the constraints would be, right? Something that we would negotiate and agree on. Like it would kind of be a fantasy to have him receive that from someone else while I watch. And it'd be even better if somebody fed me like while I watch, right? So, he's getting his need met. I'm getting a need met. It fulfills maybe a fantasy for one or both of us. And, maybe there's some pleasure and enjoyment out of it.
Well, and you're both happy and you've had that healthy, conversation about it.
Well, and I have to say, like, even before, when we were talking before the call, you probably noticed me dancing around the topic. Like I was having such a hard time to even like start mentioning this fantasy to you because, for me, I have in my lifetime experienced judgment about a fantasy or two.
Right.
And so it's super vulnerable to say it. But now I've gotten to a point where I'm comfortable with my partner, with my sexuality, to be able to talk to you and the, thousands of people that listen.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important because I know that there's going to be plenty of people that are going to listen to this, and it's going to resonate in one, shape or form. And, and that's really the whole purpose of being able to be, have this open communication.
Yeah.
The two of us.
Well, and I would add to the end of that if we were to act out this fantasy, the other part that would be super important would be to talk about it again afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. And more talking.
Yes.
Because there's going to be, stuff's going to come up.
Yes.
Right?
I'm sure.
Fear. Fear that the person's going to hook up with that person without you knowing about it, or fear that, they're going to get something out of that they're not getting from you, or, who knows what could come up.
Right.
But it's going to be important to process it when it does.
Right.
And it's going to be important to process it, 6 months down the road when maybe it comes up again, and for the partner who, was the receiver, or, the opposite partner, I guess, in whatever the processing would be, to be able to listen with compassion, and caring, because this person did something that was very vulnerable for them.
Right.
And the person who got the blowjob, for example, might also have feelings that came up, and it would be really important to sit down and be able to process those and talk about it. Like, how did that, it made me realize that I was really missing this thing, or it made me realize that I wanted the connection with you. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, so much could come up.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah. And I think what can get scary for a lot of people, I'm just kind of assuming here, because I'm pretty open when it comes to my own sexuality. It's not something that I've ever sort of struggled with, thank the Lord. But it doesn't mean that, obviously, we're all human.
Or that it couldn't happen in the future, right?
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. And we talked about that. But the fact of, not feeling comfortable to be able to have that conversation and asking their partner, like, is this something that you miss? And, I think I guess I just wonder, how damaging that can be, for a relationship. But I mean, and not even have that conversation about it. And it kind of just, like I said, like, you just stop doing it, or maybe it just,
fades away.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if they got together, if the relationship started off on that, on that note where the oral sex wasn't really something that, they cared about, then maybe it wasn't a big deal for them. But yeah, I mean, the only reason why I mentioned that is just because, working so closely with families in the home. And again, I don't talk about sex because it's, I'll mention it, but it's not something that I obviously have a conversation about, because it's not my specialty. But it's just, you just see so much, and I'm very in tune when a couple is not sort of vibing with each other. I'm very sensitive to that.
Yeah. Well, and it's also important. I mean, people change. People, something they used to like might have become a chore. You mentioned working with parents as well, especially once kids come into play. So many times the bulk of the work falls on mom.
Yes.
Or I should say even on just one partner, because sometimes it's not mom.
Yep.
But typically when it does happen, the mom or the primary caregiver really gets sort of saddled with all of the work related to kids and family and home. And they sort of get put into a role of serving or doing all the time.
Yep.
And so what I find ends up being really important is for the person who is doing the serving or doing all of the time to be able to figure out a way to get what they want. It becomes important to be able to ask for things that they want, like what they want, not what they think the other person wants.
Right.
Right. So to be able to move into a space of taking, to move into, exactly.
Yeah.
That becomes really important.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that's definitely something that is necessary to sort of point out, especially for the parents that have just had little ones.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and the taking is like, will you do this for me kind of thing also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like asking for what you want. And yeah, we hear of that all the time, right? How important it is to ask for what you want. But it really, it is truly something that is relevant, right? And the other thing too, like sometimes just being able to say no to things, like most people I find who've had their boundaries crossed, whether their boundaries are being crossed because they're being asked to do things all the time and they don't, they're just serving, right? They're doing them even though they don't really want to, right? But being able to find things that they can say no to and to be able to exercise that no, if they're able to use that no, like as often as they can, they find that they can get to a yes. Right. Eventually they figure out which things they want to say yes to.
Right. Yeah.
Blowjobs might be one of them.
You never know, right? You never know. Yeah. You never know until you ask, or at least have that open communication.
Right.
Is there any specific suggestions that you would give for our viewers listening in that, if it's something that, either the mom or dad is sort of struggling with as far as, their sex life being a little bit non-existent or as often, how they could go about sort of having that uncomfortable conversation, which I'm going to guess is probably 9 times out of 10 going to be uncomfortable because they've gotten to where they're at now.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the tools that I learned from one of my teachers that I employ all the time is noticing, right? To be able to say, I notice that we're not having sex anymore or as often anymore. Mm-hmm. And then you're basically you're stating a fact, right? There's no judgment. Mm-hmm. There's no harm, right? Yeah. The tough thing is if you're with a partner who, takes everything personally or takes that personally, figuring out a way to say, I don't want you to take this personally, but I'm noticing this thing. Right. And, that being able to point out the things that you notice and to see, where you can start from there. Because maybe the other person says, yeah, I noticed that too, and I really miss it. Or, who knows where the conversation could go after that. But for me, I always feel like noticing is the first, this is the first step. Right. As soon as it comes to your awareness and you can talk about it. My daughter has this, learned this thing in camp last year, and it just popped into my head. Oh goodness, I'll send it to you separately. Okay. It's like this AAMR, acknowledge something, make it right, and then recommit. And I'm missing the second A. Okay. But it's like acknowledge what's going on, whatever that other A is, and then make it right, like figure out a way that you can make it right, and then recommit to the relationship or whatever, right?
Gotcha.
This little tool my kid picked up at camp.
No, I love that. And I think the recommit part is really, a big one, obviously, because, it's your relationship. And if you want to, stay married in a happy, healthy relationship, then it's something that you have to put at sort of like the top, right?
Yeah.
It has to be a priority in your marriage.
Yep. Exactly.
Very cool. Oh, I love talking about this topic, and I know that we could talk all day. So can you please let our viewers know, they'll be able to see it in the show notes, but your website is at mamasutra.com.
It's themamasutra.net.
Okay. Thank
.net. Somebody's sitting on the .com, but yeah, it's themamasutra.net. It's THEMAMASUTRA, like Kama Sutra.net.
Awesome. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure speaking with you today. I really
Yeah, likewise.
sharing your knowledge and expertise with our audience.
I'll send you the link for that picture that she has from this camp.
Oh, awesome. Yes, that would be fabulous. And again, I commend you on sharing that vulnerable piece of information in your family. I know many of our viewers will enjoy hearing that as well.
Thank you. Hopefully, if it helps somebody, right?
Absolutely. All it takes is one person. Take like one person, and then, or at least that's kind of my take. If I can help one person, then it's I've done my job.
Right on. All right.
Well, thank
you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Parenting with a Punch show, parentingwithapunch.com, to learn more about my upcoming Costa Rica couples retreat, especially now that we're on the conversation of sex. Come relax for 6 nights, recharge, meet some other couples, have fun. You can find all of the information on my website. Thank you again for tuning in. And remember, keep asking for more. You deserve it.
Yo, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Oh, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Class is in session. Please be seated. Behaviors that get attention get repeated. Avoid the power struggle cause it will get you heated. Listen to Amanda cause she knows how to teach it. Yo, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Oh, this ain't parents out to lunch. No, this is parenting with the punch. Yeah.